1970s was the decade of platform shoes, bell-bottom pants, and polyester suits. It was hip to be square, and Tony Orlando and Dawn were the hippest group on the block.
Means you meet me in the hallway.
Tony Orlando and Dawn were an integral part of the 70s.
To fans and colleagues alike, Orlando was the consummate performer.
Tony's talent is fantastic.
He was charming and charismatic.
That's right, the regular Freddie Prinze looking good.
Audiences adored Tony Orlando. But Tony says the grueling demands of public life drove him to use drugs.
I found myself addicted to cocaine.
Eventually, he would suffer a nervous breakdown. Depressed and suicidal, Tony checked himself into New York Hospital's psychiatric ward.
It was unbelievable, really. It was scary.
Tonight, Tony Orlando talks candidly about the highs and lows of his life and why the suicide of his best friend, Freddie Prinze, pushed him over the edge and nearly forced him to quit show business.
I'm sure that there was an emotional exhaustion based on the overwhelming experience of seeing my friend blow his brains out.
Tony Orlando, the story behind the music.
Hopefully you remember this.
Some performers thrive on their reputations as bad boys. Others, like Tony Orlando, win audiences over with a clean-cut image. In the 1970s, nobody was more likable and squeaky clean than Tony.
You know, it wasn't that you were a star. You were part of their family, and you took it seriously. At least I did.
I think the secret to Tony Orlando's music is it's every man's music. It's called popular music.
Blessed with talent, charm, and good looks, Tony was the kind of performer who would do anything for his fans.
He was kind of like the guy next door. He was reachable. He was someone that you could spend some time with and feel comfortable. And I think that appealed to everyone.
In a few short years, Tony Orlando went from being a record company executive to a hit performer with nearly a dozen albums and a top-rated TV show. But at the height of his career, Tony found himself dependent on cocaine, and he suffered a breakdown that almost destroyed him.
When the applause goes away, or the fear of the applause going away, hits you, it's a terrible mental problem. Some people turn to drink, others turn to drugs. Some people just become unhinged. It's too much stress.
4 decades after bursting on the scene, Tony says he still feels like the same child who fantasized about fame and glory up on this New York rooftop.
All the nights and nights, singing love songs through the night. This would be my stage. The fire escapes was my box seats, and every stoop was my front row. It was part of the dream weaving of my life. And then to be back on the street after all these years is a fun feeling, because it came true.
Michael Anthony Orlando Cassavetes was born on April 3rd, 1944. His father was a Greek furrier, his mother a Puerto Rican housewife. Raised poor in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen, his mother says Tony has always been a natural entertainer.
At 3 years old, he put a hat on and a cane, and he started to sing and dance. I said, no, he's not going into show business, but he did.
When Tony was just 5, his parents divorced. A year later, his mom remarried, and in 1954, his sister Rhonda was born. She was a beautiful little girl, but suffered from cerebral palsy and was severely retarded. Rhonda was unable to speak. The family struggled to communicate with her until 10-year-old Tony realized he could reach her with music. When he sang and danced, Rhonda would smile.
She was crazy for him. She knew his voice, even though she couldn't talk, she couldn't do anything, but she knew when he sung who he was.
Being that she was unable to communicate other than with music, it brought me to learn the guitar, to sing to her, Little did I know that she'd be my first audience.
Bless you, bless every breath that you take. Yeah, bless every move that you make so perfectly.
He'd come home from school, take the guitar, and sit by the bed and just play for her while I cooked or do what I had to do.
Tony not only used music to entertain his sister, he used it to survive on the violent streets of Hell's Kitchen.
So we would have gang fights, and there would be gangs in the area. But when you sang, you were in a slot that you could actually talk to the two rival gangs, and it would be cool.
Believing music was his ticket to escaping poverty, he quit school after 8th grade to pursue his dream. Tony formed a street corner doo-wop group called the Five Gents.
When I started with the Gents, I was 12. I wanted to be Frankie Lyman.
Why does the rain fall from above? Why do fools fall in love? Why do they fall in love?
There was a group called Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Why do fools fall in love? Kind of like the first Michael Jackson.
Groups were a dime a dozen in those days, and I didn't think he would ever make it or something, but I knew then that that's what he wanted.
In 1960, the talented teen got what he wanted. He auditioned for legendary record promoter Don Kirshner in this Broadway office building.
I remember him walking in one day with a guitar.
He sits down, he says, play for me, and I remember playing La Bamba.
I remember he was about 250 pounds, had an acne condition, and had all the ingredients you wouldn't buy as a performer.
Why they ever signed a 16-year-old, 256-pound singer is still amazing to me.
But he had that warmth and sensitivity and desire, and I sensed kind of a white Ray Charles in his feeling, a kind of ethnic quality.
And he looked at me and he said, I want to introduce you to two songwriters. Then I want you to go out to their house with them. They live in Brooklyn. Can you get out to Brooklyn?
When Tony got to Brooklyn, he met the legendary songwriting team of Carole King and Jerry Goffin. It was a match made in heaven. At age 16, Tony became the first singer to sign with Epic Records. And within weeks, his first single, Halfway to Paradise, written by Goffin and King, reached the top 40.
Halfway to paradise.
2 months later, Tony proved he wasn't just a one-hit wonder.
Oh, darling, bless you, bless every breath that you take.
The song, Bless You, went all the way to number 15 on the Billboard chart. Tony had a golden voice, and although he looked like a slim teen heartthrob in his first publicity shot, he's the first to admit he had a little bit of help. To make him look thinner, the edges of his sweater were trimmed.
They took a razor blade and they just went zip, zip, zip. And I had to live up to this picture.
Tony went on a diet, dropped nearly 100 pounds, and soon women were crazy about him.
It was embarrassing to me when women would scream or I would run up and didn't do that whole. I didn't know how to handle it.
I thought it was great. I loved it.
In 1961, Tony headed out on his first tour with fellow crooner Bobby Vinton. Tony's mother wasn't far behind.
Following Bobby and me, that was my mother, with the camera going, there they are. I was 16, I was going, Ma, come on, will you? You follow me on the road?
Baby, happy times are here to stay.
By his 17th birthday, Tony Orlando was a teen superstar with 3 hit songs. But at age 20, the British invasion cut his career short.
And when they came in with the surge from England, it really put a damper on all the American songwriters and artists. And people, were talking about Beatlemania.
And most American performers were not getting radio play. And I could have either hung in there through it or did what I did, which was the smartest thing I could have ever done.
Next, Tony backs away from the mic and becomes Mr. Mom.
I was doing the ironing and the cooking and and the sewing.
And later, Tony breaks down.
The brakes went on. And I said, I quit. I have to leave this stage.
When Behind the Music continues. In 1964, when the Beatles invaded America, doo-woppers like Tony Orlando couldn't compete with the Fab Four. At age 20, Tony quit the music business. He married his sweetheart, Elaine Berman, who had a 5-year-old son, and settled down.
He was sweet, ambitious, kind. We had fun. We hardly had any money, but we really didn't care that much.
Like 64, I'm out of work, and she's working for, I don't know, a music publishing company for, I don't know, $70 a week, whatever it was then. And I was doing the ironing and the cooking and the sewing, and I was Mr. Mom.
After 4 years as a house husband, he was itching to get back into the music business, and in 1968 took a job as an assistant at MGM's music publishing division. Tony's salary was a mere $100 a week.
I didn't care about stardom or being a star as much as I cared about being in the business.
In 2 short years, Tony went from being an assistant at the publishing company to an executive at CBS Records. He worked with such performers as James Taylor, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Barry Manilow.
I was happy behind that desk because I was in the business. I was in the studio. I was behind the desk. I was signing performers, signing new writers.
But Tony never really gave up the idea of being a performer, and his friend, record producer Hank Medris, knew it. Medris believed that with the right song, Tony Orlando could be back on top of the charts.
And I remembered his original records, Halfway to Paradise and Bless You, and those kind of records had that. It was kind of, for that period, it was white soul.
He came to me with a song called Candida, with another singer on it.
And when we listened to the record, the performance didn't make it.
He said, Tony, why don't you do it for me? I said, because if I do it for you, Hank, I'm going to lose this position. I'm general manager of this company. How can I record for a company that's our competitor?
We made an agreement that if I didn't mention his name, and if nobody found out, that he would do it, but we had to create, a name other than his own.
Oh, Candida, we could make it together.
In 1970, the group Dawn was born, named after a record executive's daughter. Without telling anyone, including his pregnant wife, Tony and 3 studio singers recorded the song Candida for rival label Bell Records. 3 months later, it was a #1 hit on the radio.
It was the wildest thing. I think it was 8 or 9 months pregnant with John at the time. And we're driving in our car, and I hear it on the radio, and I said, Tony, that sounds just like you. He said, it is.
Tony was thrilled with the song's success, and making that success even sweeter was the birth of his son John in September 1970. But with a newborn baby, Tony says he wasn't willing to quit his day job to pursue an uncertain singing career. He did, however, agree to record another song with the same studio singers. It was called Knock 3 Times, and Tony admits he thought it was hokey.
I mean, I just heard the song they played me. This is not going to be a hit. Knock 3 times on the ceiling, twice in the pipe. No one even has exposed pipes anymore. What are they talking about? It'll never be a hit. 6 million records later, it was #1.
Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me. Twice on the pipe if the answer is no.
Tony never told anyone that he sang those hit songs for Bell Records because he feared he'd lose his job at CBS. But fans were anxious to see the group. The singers weren't pictured on the album cover and had never performed live. More than a dozen other groups began calling themselves Dawn and claimed Candida and Knock 3 Times as their own.
I had to take the money that was given to me as an advance to find lawyers to fight off all these bogus groups.
Oh, I at that point, I really started thinking down the road a bit, and I said, hey, Tony, the record's #1, and why don't you kind of introduce to the world that it's you?
Tony agreed and left his job at CBS. He teamed up with backup singers Thelma Hopkins and Joyce Vincent Wilson and hit the road as Dawn. After a short tour of Europe to polish its act, Dawn made its television debut on The David Frost Show in February 1972.
Do you know there have been 14 bogus groups called Dawn, so popular at Dawn, and right now they're going to sing Knock 3 times.
Hey girl, what you doing down there?
I thought he could do singing on weekends. I didn't really realize that we'd be going back on the road and living the performer's life. I was pretty naive.
Now do you want me? Do you need me? Do you love me like I love you?
In 1972, Tony was constantly on the road. A busy concert and recording schedule kept him away from home. Dawn's first album had charted nearly a half-dozen hit singles. A year later, Tony released what would become his signature song, the best-selling single of the year and an anthem of freedom, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree.
I sang that song for the first time live on stage at the Cotton Bowl, 1973, the day that the POWs came home from Vietnam.
While Tie a Yellow Ribbon went on to be Tony's biggest hit, you won't hear it in this program. The song's publishers denied Behind the Music's request to license it for broadcast.
It is a frustrating thing that the law says that the publisher has the right to license the song, which means that here I've had this song identified with me now for 25 years, and I'll be stopped from singing it on this show.
The publishers say they currently do not issue any licenses to productions which involve Tony Orlando.
You got it? You ready? Yeah. Go.
According to Tony, he upset them in 1993 when he opened a concert hall in Branson, Missouri called the Yellow Ribbon Theater. Tony believes that the publishers are offended because they did not share in the profits from the theater. The publishers say they could not comment because the matter is presently in dispute.
It confuses me. I don't understand. It cheats the public. It cheats the song.
In 1974, at the first American Music Awards, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree won Single of the Year. A month later, when the group performed the song at the Grammy Awards, Dawn caught the eye of then CBS Director of Programming, Fred Silverman.
I decided that they should have a variety show on CBS because I saw in them what I had seen in Sonny and Cher.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Orlando and Dawn.
They were very, very good and very funny.
I'd like to thank you all for the wonderful letters that you've sent us.
And
Really.
the cookies and the cakes.
Yeah.
And the candies and the divinity fudge.
Yeah. If you keep that up, you know that? What's going to happen? You're going to see a lot more of Tony Orlando and Dawn.
It was Fred Silverman who changed the group's name from Dawn to Tony Orlando and Dawn and gave the trio a summer replacement variety show, which taped in Los Angeles. The ratings were so high that the show became a regular CBS series, and Thelma, Joyce, Tony, and his family relocated to L.A.
They enjoyed one another's company, and it came across, not only on records, but on television. Tony Orlando and Dawn were an integral part of the 70s.
Fairly well, I know you're leaving. I know you're leaving.
Next, Tony finds a kindred spirit in comedian Freddie Prinze.
He had an impact on you. He was one of those people.
And later, Tony Orlando bids a tearful, final farewell to his little sister.
Sometimes I'd always wonder how come I was fortunate and she wasn't.
When Behind the Music continues.
This was a pretty one.
He don't love you like
By the mid-1970s, Tony Orlando was selling millions of records and had a hit TV show. He had achieved more wealth and popularity than a poor kid from Hell's Kitchen could have dreamed of.
And they said a Puerto Rican New York could never get to the top.
It was magical to see the way he worked an audience.
Tony Orlando and Dawn show producer Ernest Chambers says the singer was an ideal straight man, but but it took Tony a while to get used to being the butt of Thelma and Joyce's jokes.
But I'm not ashamed to confess that I have a rabbit's foot.
No kidding. You know, you can hardly tell in those shoes.
Tony came in after the first performance for an audience and called me in his dressing room. He was irate. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "They're laughing at me." I said, "They're supposed to laugh at you. This is comedy."
They say good things come in threes, and there are three of us. 1, 2, 3, right?
Well, he was always great at math.
Tony quickly became part of the elite Hollywood scene, frequently rubbing shoulders with stars like Milton Berle, Joey Bishop, and Dom DeLuise. Then in July 1975, during an appearance on the Dinah Shore Show, Tony met Chico and the Man star Freddie Prinze, a fellow Puerto Rican performer Tony was often mistaken for.
And for my Puerto Rican brother over here,
Yeah.
I'm tired of getting your fan mail.
The two clicked instantly.
They both knew what the grueling scheduling was in their lives, the pressure to always be wonderful. They both spoke Spanish. They were kindred souls in that sense.
I could say things that his mother did that was very Puerto Rican that I would know. And so there was this brothership based on that.
It has developed into quite a beautiful friendship.
Oh.
Yeah, we become tight since that day.
I know. I've heard the stories are legendary.
Tony and Freddie became inseparable. Their families spent weekends together. They dreamed of teaming up in the movies and made special guest appearances on each other's shows.
Looking good.
I still haven't gotten the check from Chico and the Man.
The one that you did last year?
Right.
Did you see your performance?
Tony and Freddie shared a special bond, and their relationship would leave a deep and lasting impression on Tony's life.
He had an impact on you. He was one of those people.
It was the summer of 1975, and back at home, Tony's little sister Rhonda was struggling to survive. She had fallen ill with pneumonia. Too weakened by her cerebral palsy and frail immune system, she never recovered. And at age 21, Rhonda died. It was a crushing blow to Tony.
She was dealt a deck of cards that I was never dealt, you know? And I guess there was a guilt thing. Sometimes I'd always wonder how come I was fortunate and she wasn't. I don't know how come I got all this handed to me.
Though she was unable to speak, Tony says Rhonda taught him to appreciate life's simplest pleasures.
She never really was out of diapers. She ate strained baby food. But it was a great lesson for me because she was the greatest teacher I ever had, my sister. You have the ability to do something as simple as clap your hands and stop your feet, my sister. I only wish she could have. It was the motivation all the time. She was always the piston to my engine.
In memory of his sister, Tony helped create the Rhonda Marie Schroeder Group Home for the Disabled in New Jersey. He says not a day goes by he doesn't think about Rhonda and the laughter and love that they shared.
My fondest memory of my sister was her smile when she heard music. It really, really was the only language I had with my sister.
And bless your little heart for loving me.
Soon after his sister's death, Tony and singers Thelma Hopkins and Joyce Vincent Wilson were back at work performing at a relentless pace.
I need to love you, girl, like I love you.
In the summer of 1976, the group performed 32 concerts in 36 days. They took their show to Las Vegas for one final week of concert dates. While on stage there, the stress caught up with Dawn.
Joyce and I sort of faded out the last 3 days.
And Mr. Indestructible here.
Then he sort of collapsed.
I heard a crash, and I thought it was the drums that had broken down, and I turned around, and there, lo and behold, my God, it was frightening. It was Joyce who had fainted on stage.
The group canceled its remaining concert dates, but Tony refused to slow down. He worked 18 hours a day on his television show and in the recording studio. But soon the non-stop pace was catching up with him as well.
I was involved with too much, and it's called burnout. And sooner or later, you burn out. You get so exhausted. Then you make decisions in life that you shouldn't make. You do things you shouldn't do. I was just ragged, man. I was just tired as can be. And
I remember that we'd go to the studio. His voice wouldn't even match. He was so tired from having, done TV all day that by the start of a recording session and at the end, you wouldn't even know it was the same guy.
In the fall of 1976, Tony was introduced to a drug he was told could be the antidote to his exhaustion.
one of those stagehands came in there and laid a couple of lines of cocaine on the thing, and he said, take a couple of hits of this. This will make you feel, it's not like you won't get stoned, you won't get drunk, you won't lose, you'll just get like 14 cups of coffee. Go ahead. I said, look, I don't do any of that stuff. He said, just trust me, it's not a problem. And he rolled up a dollar bill, and there I went. And then right then I said, ooh, this stuff has something going for it. And all of a sudden, I found myself, wow, I'm going to go out and do that sketch. And I went out and did that sketch. I had all this energy, I thought. I said, wow, that's pretty good. So I took it again.
Soon, those around him began to suspect his newfound energy came from cocaine.
I had a very, very close relationship with him, so I went in and I closed the door and I said, I have got to ask you. I mean, I hear rumors around the building that you are on drugs. And he swore to me that he wasn't.
I confronted him with it, and he just said, oh, it's just a little, I just do it once in a while. It's not a big deal. It's just to keep my energy level higher because the demands on him were so great.
I always found myself addicted to cocaine.
Complicating matters, Tony's best friend, Freddie Prinze, was also a cocaine user.
I walked into my bedroom, and they were both in the closet, and I remember Freddie said, uh-oh, here comes the CIA, meaning me, and they both had a bottle of Coke that they were using.
The demands of public life were taking a toll on Tony and Elaine's marriage, and things only got worse in the fall of 1976, when Tony Orlando's variety show was canceled due to its slipping ratings.
You're really a beautiful audience. Thank you.
While he was disappointed at his loss, Tony says his troubles were nothing compared to those of friend Freddie Prinze.
My head is burning and my feet are like ice.
According to news reports, Freddie's life was a mess. He was in the middle of an ugly divorce and a bitter legal battle with a former manager. Then in November 1976, he was charged with driving under the influence of narcotics. At Tony's Brentwood mansion, Freddie confessed he was contemplating suicide.
I remember Freddie in that backyard. He would act out suicide, and he would talk about it. He talked about it to me.
In the early morning hours of January 28, 1977, Freddie Prinze followed through with his threat at this Los Angeles hotel. A few hours later, Elaine Orlando received a call with the news that Freddie had shot himself in the head with a .38 caliber revolver. He was in critical condition.
And I woke up Tony, who just sat at the edge of the bed for an hour and didn't move. He was just staring into space and couldn't move. It was awful.
Tony pulled himself together and headed to UCLA Medical Center to be by Freddie's side.
And there he is with a tremendous wound in his head at UCLA, and still holding the position in his fingers like he had a gun in his hand, lying in that bed. Man, let me tell you something. That'll jolt anybody. I don't care who you are.
On the afternoon of January 29th, Tony says he cradled Freddie in his arms and watched as his best friend was taken off life support.
And then when they pull that plug, because he's brain dead and it's all over, and you kiss ashen white face and cold lips of a 22-year-old friend,
They'll shake reality right down to your boots. I felt very guilty, and I loved Freddie.
At Freddie's funeral, Tony was barely able to maintain his composure.
Say your prayers, kiss him goodbye, because he really, truly did love you all, okay? Slowly.
According to the coroner's report, traces of quaaludes, cocaine, codeine, and morphine were found in Freddie's system. Tony believes drugs destroyed Freddie. Fearing that cocaine might do the same to him, Tony says he quit cold turkey. In addition, he says he gave up caffeine and his 4-pack-a-day cigarette habit.
But Freddie's death, I just kind of like went, nothing. I don't want anything. I don't want to touch anything. I don't want to drink anything that would put me in any state.
The dramatic events of the past 2 years had taken their toll on Tony. His sister had died, his best friend had committed suicide, and his popularity was beginning to fade. In a matter of months, his world would come crashing down. Next, depressed and suicidal, Tony checks into a psychiatric ward.
He would call from a payphone. He was frightened.
And later, Tony's back on top.
It's a great feeling to know so many millions of people throughout his life have loved him.
When Behind the Music continues. In the summer of 1977, Tony Orlando was under enormous strain. In less than 2 years, he had lost his sister, his best friend, and his television series. He was also struggling to stay off cocaine.
It just seemed insurmountable at the time. I did not know anything about the recovery period of someone on drug use, so I had no idea what the future would hold. I was frightened for him.
I'm sure that there was an emotional exhaustion and a breakdown based on the overwhelming experience of seeing my friend blow his brains out.
On the evening of July 29th, 1977, Tony Orlando stepped out on stage like he had hundreds of times before. In front of a packed house in Cohasset, Massachusetts, Tony started singing. Shortly into the performance, Tony says something inside him snapped. He stopped the show and began rambling about his friend, Freddie Prinze.
The woman yelled out, "We're not here to hear about Freddie Prinze," and she was right. But I was still in the middle of all that, see? I was still mourning him.
It was the ultimate nightmare. I had this husband on stage challenging people in the audience.
That's BS, lady, and I heard myself. Like slow motion. That's BS, lady, BS, lady, BS, lady, BS, lady, BS. It looks like an ankle to it or something. And I went, what am I doing?
I walked up on stage, covered the microphone, and said, "You're coming with me. You're not well."
At that point, ladies and gentlemen, the brakes went on. And I said, I quit. I have to leave the stage.
The following day, Elaine chartered a Learjet to New York City and checked Tony into the Regency Hotel. There she gathered friends and family to decide how to best help Tony.
At one point, he was threatening suicide, and we were all very concerned.
The worst came through my mind, and it was a terrible, terrible part of my life. And something I like to forget.
For weeks, Tony laid in the hotel room doing little more than watching television. He had no idea what was wrong with him until he saw a news report on manic depression.
And I said, that's me. I got that. That's what I have. If anybody's wondering what it is, that's what it is.
3 weeks after his breakdown, Tony checked himself into New York Hospital for psychiatric observation.
A metal door opened up and closed behind me. And
I think it was a sobering experience for him when he saw people that were really in trouble all around him. I know it frightened him.
I mean, I was walking through a mental ward with people who were making believe they were playing tennis and had tennis racks in their hands and people strangling people on the floors.
He would call from a payphone. He was frightened. because he saw people talking to themselves. He saw people screaming that were locked in solitary confinement. I'm sure he was afraid to close his eyes.
It was unbelievable, really. It was scary.
After just 2 days, Tony says he was so frightened that he checked himself out of the hospital and into the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. He hired a psychiatrist to help him get well.
And it was in that place, in this incredibly glamorous suite overlooking all of New York, my hometown, in which I was trying to get myself back up.
That's how we treated this, with the help of the psychiatrist, medication, and Tony's own will to get better.
Tony's psychiatrist confirmed his manic depressive diagnosis and prescribed lithium to control his mood swings. Tony discussed his painful struggle with manic depression on The Mike Douglas Show.
Did you ever think of suicide at any point? Did you?
Yes. I thought of suicide on a very normal basis, like I think the general public has thought of suicide. The lady that sits next to me and my children saved my life. You know, I could have gone the other way. There are 2 lessons. There's the Freddie Prinze lesson, and there's the Tony Orlando lesson. And I, believe me, quit my way better than his.
In November 1977, 4 months after his breakdown, Tony triumphantly returned to the stage. But this time he returned alone. After his breakdown, Tony, Thelma, and Joyce disbanded. Tony was determined to make it on his own.
Not only did I get well, but oh my God, I'm back doing the thing I love most in the whole wide world.
Tony threw himself into rebuilding his career and found himself back in the spotlight in the early 1980s during the hostage crisis in Iran. While the Americans were held captive, and upon their release, people across the country showed support with yellow ribbons, and Tony's 1973 hit, Tie a Yellow Ribbon, was back on the radio.
When we recorded that record on a rainy afternoon in New York City, I never thought that I would see that song become an anthem of freedom.
The attention he received during the hostage crisis made Tony more determined to get his career back on track. But in the process, his marriage crumbled. In January 1984, after 18 years together, Elaine filed for divorce. Shortly after the unhappy couple parted ways, it appeared Tony was about to get another big break. In 1985, he was asked to guest star on The Cosby Show.
Hey, Biff. How you doing, Tony? Yeah, good to see you. All right, thank you. Ay, Dios mío, mira qué bonito está.
Tony's talent is fantastic. His soul is fantastic.
Check that out. June 1981.
Tony, you know you're crazy.
Sure I'm crazy. That's why I'm the boss here.
Bill Cosby was looking for a spin-off of his successful series, and Tony saw it as an opportunity to launch a new phase of his career. But in the end, NBC passed on the idea.
When it comes to television series, it can be awfully cruel in that really and truly you only get one shot.
While Bill Cosby never held him responsible for the show's failure, Tony blamed himself.
I was so worried about giving him the show he wanted, and I felt like I let him down.
And he's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. He didn't let me down. Tony is an excellent performer.
Despite the setback, Tony never gave up. In 1988, he and Dawn reunited. It was the first time in 11 years they had performed together. But after a 5-week concert tour, Tony and his backup singers once again went their separate ways. Tony, however, never stopped doing what he loves most, performing. Coming up, after more than 4 decades, Tony Orlando keeps the audience cheering.
It shouldn't be. I'm approaching 40 years in show business. I'm lucky to stay in this business this long.
When Behind the Music continues. 25 years after Tony Orlando and Dawn first became a pop sensation, Tony is still performing. He entertains fans at the 2,200-seat Talk of the Town Theater in Branson, Missouri. This Ozark Mountain playground is called the Las Vegas of the Midwest, where stars like Wayne Newton, the Lennon Sisters, and Yakov Smirnoff entertain legions of faithful fans.
Would you like to marry me? Oh, what do you
Today, Tony has all but retired from the road. Now his family comes first. He lives with his wife Francine and their young daughter Jenny Rose on the outskirts of Branson.
Well, Branson, Missouri was a place in which opened up an opportunity for me to be with my family. If you did 300 shows a year in one place for the first time in my life, I could go home for dinner. It was that simple.
Looking back, Tony says he never could have achieved such success without the love of his family and the inspiration of his sister Rhonda. Despite her severe disabilities, he says she motivated him to be the best performer he could be.
And she couldn't clap her hands or stomp her feet or do all the things that audiences can do. And I think that deep down inside, when I'm asking that audience to get into it and clap their hands and stomp their feet, I'm really saying, you know, you can do it.
Oh, mama, 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 harmonizing nights.
To Tony, it seems like a lifetime since he dropped out of 8th grade to harmonize in Hell's Kitchen. As he walks the streets of his youth, he reminisces about the early days when, as a 16-year-old, he signed his first record deal and made young girls scream.
It shouldn't be. I'm approaching 40 years in show business. I'm lucky to stay in this business this long.
Tony Orlando has lost some of those closest to him and nearly lost himself. Yet he has always managed to overcome life's challenges and remains a hero to his fans and those who love him.
It's a great feeling to know so many millions of people throughout his life have loved him.
I think he would describe his life as complete and happy and loving what he's doing and where he's living and all of us being together every day.
I like that I feel like I've gained my stripes as a grown-up. I think I always never felt like I was grown up. I always felt like 16 years old was just yesterday afternoon. But there's something nice about feeling like you've experienced enough in life in which you've gained a stripe or two on their sleeve, and that you're able to cope and understand and see life through adult eyes, and that you're able to fulfill commitments, really fulfill them.
How'd you know we'd find our star? How'd you know it would come true?